Sabah al-Khair, good morning dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Bringing you the news and views and the untold side of the Palestinian struggle for freedom from a Palestinian perspective. Good morning, Rob. How are you?
So I'm very well indeed. How are you, mate?
Yeah, really well, buddy, really well. We've got somebody on the show today that I haven't seen for 10 years. We're joined by journalist, filmmaker, activist, Harry Fear. Good morning, Harry.
Nice to speak to you guys. Good morning, afternoon, evening.
No, it's great to speak to you. Now, why don't you tell us how you came to Palestine, Harry?
Yeah, I mean, it was when I was about 17. I was kind of, politically educating myself, reading progressive magazine in the UK, The New Statesman, and basically only ever read John Pilger's column, and then read one or two of John Pilger's books. And Freedom Next Time includes at least one chapter on Palestine. And the sheer brutality, sort of qualitative horror of the ongoing catastrophe in Palestine really hit me and moved me deeply. Not to mention the British history interwoven in it, which adds an additional responsibility. And not to mention the symbolism and the kind of religious connection to the place adds further weight to that place and that horror. So it's something, once the light's gone on with Palestine as an injustice, I think it becomes like a litmus test for a lot of us to see how people stand on issues of justice generally. So for me, it's just
once you've seen it, you can't just unsee it.
You can't unsee it. And I think, on the left, progressive politics across the certainly Anglophone world, if you see someone on the left who kind of can't call Israeli apartheid, you kind of just know that they're just a time-wasting centrist pretending to be a leftist. And I think it's one of those things where it kind of is polarizing quite naturally in a sense. But for me, I didn't go into it with a kind of fanaticism against the Israelis. I had some Israeli friends when I grew up and went to college, but just saw them as very nice, normal people. And I had some Arab friends. And then over time, when I was 18, 19, 20, made more Muslim friends and some Arab friends and some Palestinian friends. And I just ended up having more and more Palestinian friends online. And then ended up going to Jerusalem and the West Bank in 2010, and then Gaza for the first time in 2012.
Just before you go, when you were reading the John Pilger books, what was it that shook you, or what was it that made you want to get involved?
It was just this anecdote of, I think it would have been during the first Intifada, I'm not 100% sure, but an Israeli sniper executing a Palestinian mother walking down a street.
Yes.
And secondary to that, the image captured in the same story, how even the Red Cross wasn't safe from the Israelis' force. And for me, that was a kind of a benchmark of the brutality and qualitatively shocking. There's a lot of there's a lot to say in a sense about that, because, the way the UK and US have acted in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and the rest of it is often qualitatively shocking as well. And sometimes the Israelis take it further. And this is, I think, one of the cases where they do take it further. The complete lack of respect for paramedics, journalists, etc. The Israelis often exceed the brutality of the world's policeman, the US, and the UK puppet. So, we have to contextualize it realistically in this context. But the Israelis really are pretty wild when it comes to their use of force. They're way off the pitch. They have lost the plot, completely lost the plot. And the idea that it's going to be some kind of internal pressure or reformation that's going to put an end to the Palestinian situation from the Israeli side, from the Israeli society, is obviously a pipe dream, because the situation can only be sustained with a level of propagandizing there in Israel, which is sadly kind of cultish in a way. So it became clear to me that this is something which the voice has to be raised on, as a matter of conscience.
So you went to Gaza at the age of 21. Was it? Could anything have prepared you for what you actually saw?
Wow, that's a good question. Yeah, I think it's 21, 22. I'm not sure. Well, to be honest,
young to be going to do something like that.
It is pretty young. Fantastic. I mean, these days, I'm in my 30s. It's basically, 21, 22 is still a child, basically.
Yes.
I mean, to be honest, one of the things that struck me the most, which for me cuts quite deeply, was that I traveled in from Egypt. It was the time of Morsi and some liberalization of the Rafah crossing from Egypt into Gaza. And the fact that actually, apart from a change in culture, dialect, and kind of vibe, the architecture was very similar from the Egyptian side of the border, Egyptian Rafah, to the Palestinian side, Palestinian Rafah. And actually, for the first 5 minutes of driving in with a friend of mine, in the taxi to Gaza City, I was struck by how actually it felt just like Egypt. It's a naive commentary in a sense, because when you cross between countries in the EU, you do see an immediate change in architecture between two countries, right? But in this context, you didn't. And for me, that spoke to the issue, which is actually, wow, this isn't going to be as perhaps, I don't know how to put that well, but let's say as fairy tale as I had projected in my imagination. That is to say that actually, in a sense, Palestine isn't that far removed or different from Egypt. And actually that adds to the tragedy of it, because, in a sense, it's just a piece of territory which the world is picking on, if that makes any sense. I'm not sure if I've communicated myself clearly there. But actually the fact that it suddenly didn't feel radically different actually spoke to me to the kind of banality of evil of it, that you can travel 50 meters and now you can be droned at any moment, whereas 50 meters back, there was a different relative safety.
Yeah. Well, that speaks to that banality of evil that you were talking about, Harry. And I didn't want to cut in before, but when you talk about that next level of barbarity, and the Israelis are very practiced in it, and they've created their own strategy, what they call it, the Dahiyah doctrine, which is, such a level of asymmetric warfare as to devastate, civilian infrastructure to make nothing usable. And we've seen it most recently in Gaza as to, just the complete devastation and the massive amount of homelessness. I mean, Richard Falk, who's a renowned international jurist, calls the Dahiyah doctrine state terrorism. Unfortunately, and you're absolutely true, Israel's not the only country that does it. The United States did it in Libya and, Fallujah, Iraq, and spent $2,000 billion, $2 trillion in Afghanistan to take a developing country back to the Stone Age. I mean, they could have paved the streets with gold and bought democracy much cheaper.
Exactly. And the moral of that is, certain cultures and ideologies, they basically are averse to peace. They're averse to equality. They're averse to security. And speaking of what could have been done with the money that's been spent on the Afghanistan occupation, and the Israelis are the same, but in a sense, the Israeli case, it's even more perverse, because there are so many bridges that could be built to have peace. And often they're staring the Israeli administration's right in the face, but instead they choose to assassinate the Palestinian leaders who they could make peace with, and etc. So in that sense, again, everything's boiled up to boiling point in the so-called Holy Land. It becomes a microcosm of so many injustices and, so much conflict in the world in a tiny area that you can traverse in a few hours,
And you're right. You talk about architecture traveling through Europe. The reality is traveling through the Arab world. It's a single language, a single culture. There's nuances and subtleties moving between the Gulf and the Hashemite areas through to the Levant, but intrinsically, the one people, one culture, one land. It's that settler colonialist racist ideology, divide and conquer, that sees the Arab world bogged down in the quagmire it is today, and the imposition of a Jewish state on Palestinians in 48. Harry, when you came to Australia, you toured and you were speaking about mental health in particular, about the Gazans and the challenges the Palestinians in Gaza were having. Have you got contacts still into Gaza? What's your read on the situation at the moment?
Yeah, the latest film I made was in 2019, released then, about the ongoing war trauma in Gaza. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to work out that the mental health situation there isn't great. Why? How could it be? I think is the best way to put it. And it's a completely traumatogenic environment. To be there even for a day can breed trauma in you, even if it's outside of war. It's a suffocating place. It's an experiment lab in human suffering. It's an experiment lab in siege, and it's an experiment lab for weapons. And the reason why I made the film, which in a sense has such obvious thesis, which is, what's mental health like in a war zone? Not great, stupid, is because I felt that actually often people feel uncomfortable to talk about it because actually the situation is so bad at that level that it breeds nothing but hopelessness. And I didn't want the Israelis to allow that to be forsaken, because it allows them off the hook for a level of torture of the Palestinian society in Gaza that they are doing and exacting, I believe, quite deliberately and at least knowingly. And if you're in Gaza,
it's calculated. Absolutely.
Yeah, it is. And if you're in Gaza, you're not going to talk about it. You're not going to lament it, because you've got to worry about your own mental health and your own spiritual health. But if you have the luxury to leave, I think it is worth saying that the Israelis are operating on a deep level of deliberate evil, really, here, in trying to break the will and the spirit and the mental health of this population. And I felt that it was important to ensure that is delineated on the historical record, and that is not overlooked, because I think it does show the willful barbarity extends to every level there of Israel's control. It is not incidental, as they often try to portray.
We're speaking to Harry Fear, journalist, filmmaker, and activist. We'll put a link to that video, Gaza Still Alive, that documentary, in the podcast, so make sure you go there. Enjoy the next song, In An, featuring Shab Jdid. This is a song chosen by Harry. It's a new song, a very recent song. It's become almost an anthem for a new generation for the revolution, and it revolves around Jerusalem and Gaza. Enjoy, In An.
اهدى، ما هو كل شي باين في المحنة. الله بيشهد مين احنا، رجالة ضمن طرطش لك بنضرب حرب الليلة ما بنغلب. بدك شبال وعادي منهد لك، مرحب فيك في ولاد القدس، مندبر حالنا نحل اللغز. رنيت على نفحة وكل بخش وك شفنا وياما وكله بصف، ولا مرة نخاف ولا مرة ونص. بدك بركان بنفقع بوف، نعمل لك حفلة تخش تنط، نستقطب مال بس بدنا نقص. ما هو كله عارف، ما هو كله شايف، ما هو كله خايف والدنيا ترص. استجدع دايما ووعك بوحش، انا ادرينالين فاجع بشباب بينضرب الغاز. احنا الجدعان مش زي نقلال، رد بالك عم تعيشها بلاش. سوي واعمل واجمع كاش، ما الدنيا صعيبة وبدها زلم. سيبك من روح واحضر لك جاي، انا قرش انا قرش انا قرش انا سمكة وصحابي ملان في الجلمة. نعمل غلبة تجينا يا خالي، مناخد العتبة تخف بالليل ندوي لك عتمة. بشوف تنساش انا زي النو، سلاح فتاك في بغز رجال تحفر انفاق، ترجع بشوال ومليان اشلاء. بلاجين 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 بالجدعنة، انا فاتح دكان منبيعش هلسات، والدم مسموح بس للسباع. مكتوب على القرمة قسم لو غاد، احنا جن بنطلع ما بتشوفناش، ودموع ما تسيل اذا فش مسيل. نحن الشجعان إن قد انا اوانه، وبنبخ وطني بيع ميزانه. وكيف بس عب صوت نسولاد والشال حط كله طرح بمكانه. وإن قد انا اوانه، وبنبخ وطني بيع ميزانه. وكيف بس عب صوت نسولاد والشال حط كله طرح بمكانه.
حطمت من الرعب من الارض نطلع زي الجن بخ. هدي اللعب على هذا نترك على النار، الافكار تنطخ اخ. تراب ورا حدا اذا بلغ، انا مش مركب بركبش مع حدا. انا فين ان امكانيك البلد في البقلك ديك بين رعوة جيت اناديك طلعت تحلم نحكي حقيقة دقيقة تنفهم فيش وقت بضيع شباشة حفيدي بديك في فلاشة ما فيش رحميم انا يوم بحتاجك اجيك نعمل بلقان بطريقة طليق تفصيل على عدا العدل شو جديد انا جيك ببور بالطور بالعرض وماكينة عريض وفريد من نوعه كمين المخا كس اخت كل مين باع واختفى صدوا الوقت ولا عمره ارتخى يكتم سر دير نفطه رادارها لسات على طول بيعرفكم شو دبور على طول وبيقول واو
إن قد أنا أوانه وبوم بخ وطني بيع مزانه كيف بصعب صوت وسولاد والشيل حط كله طرح بمكانه إن قد أنا أوانه وبوم بخ وطني بيع مزانه كيف بصعب صوت وسولاد والشيل حط كله طرح بمكانه إن قد أنا أوانه وبوم بخ وطني بيع مزانه كيف بصعب صوت وسولاد والشيل حط كله طرح بمكانه إن قد أنا أوانه وبوم بخ وطني بيع مزانه كيف بصعب صوت وسولاد والشيل حط كله طرح بمكانه
Hope you enjoyed that. Now back to Harry Fear. Harry, you're a wonderful example of what privilege can afford someone, you know, the opportunity to see the world and change what should be or could be their outlook from a public school in the UK to, you know, a humanist as you are. You spoke about, we call them peppers, as you know, progressive except for Palestine, but time-wasting centrists. I love that, time-wasting centrists. What's the mood like in the UK now with Boris Johnson gone? Is Corbyn coming back? And what about the movement in the UK in general?
Yeah, as we're recording this, it's a kind of febrile time in the UK because another set of ministers have resigned from the British Trump cabinet. And, you know, every week goes by, everyone's asking themselves, surely it's over for him now. Certainly a new watermark has been reached in the Boris Johnson administration because he's recently covered up over the last fortnight for alleged sexual assault and then forgot that he had been told about it when he promoted someone to a welfare safeguarding discipline role within the UK Conservative Party who had had allegations of sexual assault put forward and investigated, and for which the man accused apologized, but was then still promoted to a welfare position. So quite an extraordinary covering up for sexual abuse. So we're living with this kind of ongoing nightmare, which is Boris Johnson. However, I think he is very much Trump in the sense that, you know, you get a lot of hot air, a lot of political drama, but actually if you replace him with someone else, are you going to get policies that are that much worse? So he is very much a kind of parallel in that sense. But he games the system very well. He games the media well. That's his main role, is to just gain power for the Conservative Party for as long as possible. And the media are just supine and just go along with it to a large extent. So, you know, we knew he was a liar. We knew he was a pretty pathological liar, philanderer, before he became prime minister. But because he served the interests of the establishment and the Tory party to ensure that Corbyn was blocked for a generation, they went along with him. But now we're paying the debt for that choice because, surprise, surprise, he lies, he doesn't read briefing material, and basically he has just allowed a complete degeneration in public services and in our public standards. So we have paid a big price for that. Talking of Corbyn, 2019, the election defeat in the winter with Corbyn being pretty roundly rejected in a sense by the electorate was a heartbreak moment for those of us who had invested in the hope that he presented. It took me, I think, 6 months to get over the kind of trauma of him having been defeated, you know, and he was defeated certainly by, you know, dark tactics, if not dark forces. The Americans said, we won't allow Corbyn to win. The Israelis said, Corbyn must not be allowed to win. And Corbyn's someone that wanted to have a human rights-led foreign policy. You can only but imagine that most countries in the world didn't want free trade and human rights-led foreign policy from the UK. And therefore you had the Saudis, you had the Israelis, you had the Americans, all against Corbyn. So no doubt there were dark forces at play which blocked him. And, you know, just where I live in the east of England, there were signs up at roundabouts saying Corbyn isn't safe with your children. Corbyn, your children are not safe with Corbyn as prime minister. Yeah. You know, implying that he's some kind of child molester. So there were dirty tactics. And I think I've implied clearly why he was blocked, because he represented a change that the powers that be do not want to see fruited. We would have ended up like Venezuela, setting an example of a social democracy that would be seen to flourish, and would have a human rights-led foreign policy, and that isn't allowed by the existing world order and the world's policemen, and that's why he was cruelly blocked.
It took us 6 months to get over it here too, Harry, if it's any consolation, mate. And the thing you left out is that concoction that this honourable humanist was in some way an anti-Semite is just beggars belief.
Yeah, and it's a bit like they say with Ukraine war, that Putin has to be seen to fail. It was the same modus operandi with Corbyn. Corbyn had to be seen to fail. His supporters had to be demoralized. They had to be ejected from the Labour Party in the 18 months that followed. And that has been, missioned very successfully by Keir Starmer, who is one of these time-wasting centrists. I mean, a lot of people on Twitter, they ask, is this guy a plant? Because his main objective seemed to be to basically destroy Corbyn, even after Corbyn had gone. By the Labour Party's lost millions, tens of thousands, if not 100,000 people ejected from the party. Corbyn has basically destroyed, buried, burnt alive. So to be honest with you, there is a parallel with Palestine here, which is that, and with the Israeli occupation of Gaza, that great power, when it wants to block something, when it wants to block resistance, when it wants to block hope, it doesn't play fair. It will rub in the dirt the face of hope in order to try to get those that could rise up into a state of learned helplessness. And the documentary GazaStillAlive.com talks about this, raises this, explains this in the Gaza context. And it's the same philosophy. The Corbyn supporters were meant to be put into a state of learned helplessness. And quite honestly, it's a success. I have a friend of mine that I used to work with at RT. He's left media and he's now retraining to work in adult social care, because he just doesn't see that there's any symmetric route to progressive hope in the UK. The only option is asymmetric. So he wants to help people directly rather than through politics.
I saw, Harry, that you did a media forum, a little while back, and you were talking about how, everyone is biased. You're either aware of it or you're not, humanizing stories rather than the numbers. Do you think there's a massive difference, or in your opinion or your experience, there's a massive difference when writing about Israel compared to anyone else?
I think there is, just because there's so much psychodrama and there are so many, hidden rules about what you can and can't say from various different angles. So it is a complete super polarizing psychodrama in a way. And actually just trying to do things, humanistically is difficult often, I think. It depends who the audience is. It depends what the platform is. But how many free places are there to talk about Palestine? Your podcast is one, but there aren't that many. So those are the rules of the game. Free speech on Palestine broadly doesn't exist. It's only on the margins.
Yeah, and we've said a few times to our listeners that if a Palestinian is killed, they'll always use the word terrorist in front of it and not name them. They'll just say a Palestinian. And if an Israeli is killed, they say it's a loving father of four, and they'll say the four kids' names, and they'll go along with it. And it's all the subliminal messaging that can turn people to be a subconscious racist against Palestine. And it hasn't overly changed, has it?
It hasn't changed. I would say it's got worse. And the problem is that when you give the Israelis an inch, they'll take a mile and they'll push it further. And I think with the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, we saw that the Israelis, if you give them the embassy move to Jerusalem, they'll take a mile. They'll just start killing well-known journalists with impunity, with really no rebuke. They'll colonize more. They'll increase the barbarity of the occupation. They'll increase the matrix of control. They'll increase arbitrary detention. They will further persecute free speech. They will further persecute the BDS, the boycott movement, all of these things. However, we have to look at it from what is the way, we can't quantify success here based on the ability to push back the Israelis, because the dynamic of power and control is asymmetry, doesn't even begin to counter. It's off the scales. The scales won't even measure. So you can't quantify success, pushback against the Israelis in a symmetrical way. It's about the effort of resistance against the evil that matters. It's not about the success in that resistance. And that is to say that we have to maintain at some level a degree of deliberate hope, even though empirically things are hopeless. Empirically, with time, the Israelis colonize more, kill more, and get away with more. But it isn't healthy to meditate on that. We have to meditate on maintaining resistance at all costs. And by resistance, I mean the clear-eyed focus about what's happening is wrong, the clear-eyed focus that human rights are universal, that humanist values are universal and should be applied to this. And so I think it's important. The Israelis do have increasing power. Social media and platforms are increasingly controlled. The media is ever subservient to Israeli narratives and language games. However, more and more people are awake. More and more people do understand the true dynamic of the Palestinian injustice. And there is hope from all of those kind of asymmetric, non-traditional forces. So we have to meditate on that equally.
Well, I was just going to ask before too, but I got sidetracked. The Palestine Action and the Elbit work, that's getting a bit of traction over in the UK. Are people talking about that? Is it making a bit of a difference?
It is gaining traction. It is meaningful. It is meaningful civil disobedience and resistance. Extraordinarily, in the cases of these UK activists, in a recent case, I believe it was in February, but I'll probably be wrong on that, sometime earlier this year, the judge actually let them go because he believed in their defense, that they were preventing a greater evil by preventing arms exports to Israel. So this is quite extraordinary, actually. But of course, this isn't going to gain traction in any traditional sense. Because if it were to gain traction in the traditional sense, it would pose a threat. And so the mainstream media will, of course, block any real reporting of any successes, because to do so keeps the status quo and serves the Israeli interest. So we don't see headline news about these activists being acquitted. We don't see headline news about them blocking roads, shutting down arms factories. You have to go onto Twitter. But do they have momentum? Yes, clearly. Are they empowered? Yes, clearly. Are they making a difference? Yes, obviously, materially they are. And again, that's just another perfect example of the things to put this asymmetric hope into, I think.
We haven't got much time to go, Harry. What are you doing at the moment? What's your current work taking you?
Well, to be honest with you, I left RT just before the pandemic started and planned to first travel to Sudan to make a documentary there. But unfortunately, I was grounded by COVID. And it's only really this year in 2022 that I have, for various personal and familial health reasons, come out of COVID. So my plans for this next 12 months is actually to do a series of interviews about what I'm calling this asymmetric hope in the face of hopeless causes, because I think it's a really important way of engaging with issues and looking at the world. I think it's timely. So that's my main media project at this time.
Fantastic. Harry. Well, when you get it up and going, we'd love to have you back on to discuss it further and promote it. We'll put a link in the podcast to your movie. It is GazaStillAlive.com. GazaStillAlive.com. So make sure you go along to that, and we'll put your website, Harry. Is that still live?
It is indeed, harryfear.com. And if you do want to support that project on asymmetric hope, you can click support, and that will very much allow me to fulfill that project.
Fantastic.
Beautiful.
We'll put a link to Harry's personal website as well as that film. And fantastic to have you on, Harry. We look forward to having you on again.
Thank you very much indeed, guys.
Thanks for listening. Tell your friends. Be sure to share the podcast. And remember, There's never been a better time for a free Palestine.